Well, only a few days ago I launched my video, What Can EV Drivers Hope to See in the UK's Autumn Budget? Top of my list was stability for the motor industry, both ICE and EVs. How prophetic that has turned out to be with the latest Labour lunacy. No, this is nothing about the cost to us EV drivers. It's about stability in the motor industry, which once again, in a single casual remark to the media, has been thrown into absolute turmoil. EV sales in November will now be negatively affected, no matter what the final verdict. I'm Dave, and I'm furious, but not for the reasons you might expect. All the UK governments and all other world leaders, apart from one Donald J. Trump, are seriously concerned about CO2, climate change and pollution killing their populations. And when Labour got in, we read in their manifesto, "We will end the chaotic Conservative chopping and changing policy," end quote. Labour set out their policies. The 2035 ban on ICE sales brought forward to 2030. 700 million invested to encourage EV adoption, 120 million to speed up EV charging growth, 2.5 billion to support EV R&D, 650 million to pay an EV grant. Simplified licenses for electric vans, 120 million to encourage businesses to go electric, promote battery factories, and the very top of the list, the electric vehicle mandate, which forces all car manufacturers to go increasingly electric year on year. And if they don't reach certain ambitious targets, they face fines of many billions of pounds or euros, which for some manufacturers could drive them into bankruptcy. Well, this list is endless, but the message is clear. We want everyone to go electric. Plain and simple, go electric. We'll even pay you to go electric. So what do? They leak to the press that they're about to or are considering putting a huge tax on EVs in this year's budget. Now tell me, just how does that promote the growth of EV adoption in the UK? How does that promote sales? How does that help the car industry hit their mandate targets? The country has a huge hole in their finances, I understand. They have an increasing hole in the finances because their strategy is working and more people are choosing EVs, meaning that fewer are driving petrol or diesel. That results in a fall in revenue from fuel duty. I understand. That is going to get worse year by year, but it does not make sense to start that process while handing out hundreds of millions in grants. Here is thousands of pounds towards your brand new EV, but if you use it, you're going to get hit by a brand new tax that we've just thought up. But the suggested £240 per year is not the point here. What's far more crucial is the horrendous impact this will have on the entire motor industry, petrol and EV. Now, I hope many of you saw my recent video, but for those that didn't, let me read just a bit of it, what I said. If, for example, the government even hinted it might impose huge tariffs on a certain country's EVs, luckily it hasn't, that country might think twice about even exporting EVs to the UK, and customers would think twice about buying them. Industry needs stability for long-term planning. A long-term plan should be long-term. End of quote. Yet the first thing they float ahead of the budget is a huge new tax on EVs. That will have one effect. It will put some people off buying or leasing an EV. Not all, but some. And the worst thing, as I said, they only have to hint they will do this for an instant effect on new EV sales. In other words, new EV sales in November are now not going to be as high as if they had stuck to their original plan and not done this. Even if it doesn't make it into the budget, they've now frightened off a large number of buyers who otherwise might have chosen an EV. So just why is the industry so vulnerable? Well, this and previous governments brought in the EV mandate. By the way, Europe did an almost identical measure. It's not just us. Whereby all car manufacturers needed to make and sell an increasing number of EVs in order to hit certain ambitious targets, in order to reduce pollution and CO2 emissions. This government then brought forward the date on which all petrol or diesel only new cars could no longer be sold. This was originally set at 2030 by the Conservatives, supported by all parties, extended to 2035 by weak Rishi Sunak, then brought forward by Labour to 2030. Manufacturers pretty much ignored the mandate in the early days, convinced it would be scrapped. They're not going to be pushed into EVs, and by the way, they were far too big to fail. But recently, despite huge lobbies to both the UK and the UK governments, they've finally poured billions into making the transformation to EVs. At least some of them have. Most likely because there are absolutely massive fines in the multi-billions for those that do not get there. Others have still not even started. Well, this year, most were slowly but steadily getting closer and closer to achieving them. Some manufacturers were already there, others were within striking distance. And this was important because previous government flip-flops had already cost them billions. See, manufacturers at first began a very half-hearted move over to EVs, but they kept the ICE car factories running as fast as they could. That was where their profit was and always had been made. EVs were a journey into the totally unknown. They were reluctant, but the mandate gave them a target and they spent billions. When the 2030 deadline was moved back to 2035, they saw this as a reprieve and instantly reverted back to making ICE and hybrids, costing them billions to switch the plants back again. Then Labour brought it forward back to 2030, and there was confusion. Would it change again? Could they persuade them that they had no hope in meeting the mandate? After all, these century-old manufacturing giants were far too big to fail. But as the years went by, and despite massive lobbying campaigns, they finally accepted that the mandate was here to stay, and they moved back to making EVs. That cost them billions. Now, the Chancellor's just reduced the number of EVs they will be able to sell for the rest of this year. What a body blow. And that's devastating. It means that many, if not most, will now be forced to spend billions in fines. Well, for some, it's going to be far worse. Take VW. They've had a really rough time in recent years, but in the last 12 months, they've had to spend $7.5 billion in tariffs selling cars and parts to the US. Then they lost 1.3 billion euros in the last quarter. Then they announced a company loss of 5 billion over the last year, and in addition, a loss of 4.7 billion in charges from Porsches failing to perform and undergoing massive changes. Now they will have to see a drop in EV sales for the last 2 months of the year, which means they probably have to pay out billions in fines. How much money does VW have left? And they're not alone. Factories are closing absolutely everywhere around the Western world. Now, if I was a CEO, I would have no idea what is likely to happen next. And I suspect Rachel Reeves hasn't either. She just needs to raise money. But I'm not convinced she understands the impact this will have on the motor industry. And I definitely know she has no idea how much damage she has already done, even if, or especially if, this road tax thing is not even implemented. Now, I know the critics will be out shouting about the money, but this is so not about the money. Most EV drivers who have had their EVs for years always knew this day would come. We got free of vehicle excise duty, and we knew that would end one day. Not a problem. We also know we'll have to pay something towards the roads we use. That is no surprise. At 10,000 miles per year, a proposed £300 tax is simply dwarfed by the £1,300 per year saving we already make. That's the difference between electricity used at 7 pence per kilowatt hour for an EV charged at home to a petrol car doing 40 miles per gallon with petrol price of £1.33 a litre. It's simply no contest. And forget all this I can't charge at home malarkey. 2/3 of all UK residents can. 80% of all current EV drivers can. Now they're just going to continue to buy or lease EVs for that massive saving and a multitude of other reasons like climate change, air pollution. The vast majority of all existing EV owners will simply buy or lease another EV at the end of their finance or lease. Now, this is not about the extra tax nor about the survival of EVs. They will survive. This is about the horrendous impact on the entire motor industry. Rachel Reeves has just proposed to slash new EV sales for the rest of the year and well into next year. Let's just have a quick look if any other political parties offer better. Conservatives, well, just very similar policies, and they were the one who backtracked on the original 2030 date, and they've backtracked a number of times. Lib Dems, well, they support the transition to EVs. They've never been in power. Well, not for ages. Neither wants anything now to slow down or stop the transition to EVs. It's only the Greens have different policies, and their bullet points are worth reading out. Not supporting the Greens, just stating. Greens call on Rachel Reeves to end 2.7 billion tax breaks to oil giants. Oh, wow. Hey, if she's short of money, there's an instant answer. BP claimed 2.21 billion profit in a quarter. Anyway, back to EVs. They want end dates. They want the Green Party wants new petrol and diesel cars banned by 2027, 3 years early, and all fossil fuel cars removed from the roads by 2035. That's not going to happen. Scrappage scheme. A vehicle scrappage scheme would be introduced to help people switch, with up to $5 billion per year in funding by the end of the parliamentary term. That's a good thing. That will encourage used EVs. It's very interesting. I'm going to come back to that particular one shortly. They are also asking for more government support. More government support would be provided to help car owners and small businesses replace their fossil fuel vehicles with EVs. That will encourage new and used EVs. Infrastructure. The policy includes the rapid rollout of EV charging points to support the transition. That's going to encourage new EV sales. Road pricing. Listen to this one. The party favours introducing road pricing to address the decline in fuel duty revenue as EV uptake increases. I agree. I'm going to come back to this one in a second. This one's absolutely key. Other measures. The policy also includes making 20 mile an hour the default speed limit in built-up areas, introducing more ultra-low emission zones, ULEZs, and promote more sustainable transport options. Again, that will encourage more EVs. The whole policy is out there to encourage new and used EV sales. Well, if the government supports more EVs is the answer, why have they just done the one thing that will slow sales down? All the Green Party policies encourage and likely to increase EV adoption. But just for a moment, let's head back to that road pricing. And I totally agree that collapsing fuel duty needs to be replaced and that those that use the road should pay. But to start it at a time when you've literally just announced you're going to be paying people to buy a new EV with a new grant is just madness. That's plain stupidity. Here's £3,750 towards buying a new EV, but we will introduce a new tax if and when you drive it to get to work. Doesn't make any sense. It has to impact EV sales. But where can they make up the loss? Well, I just go back to that Labour manifesto and Labour policy. We want to encourage more people to drive EVs, reducing pollution and cutting CO2, and are spending a fortune doing it. But if your target is for everyone to go EV and clean up the air and cut CO2, a much better solution is to make EVs cheaper, at least for now, by targeting those that damage the most and pollute the most. Make dirty, polluting cars pay more to encourage buyers to go EV, which are clean. Not the modern efficient cars. Yeah, they can hang around for a good bit longer, but those older, highly inefficient, smoke-belching, older cars and vans. That can be done through the vehicle excise duty. Not the pitifully low levels at present. Keep hiking those levels up until you replace the lost fuel duty. Drive them off the road. We don't want them on the road. Now, but while cars are most numerous and pollute more, lorries proportionately emit far higher levels of nitrogen oxides, 40% of the total, PM 2.5, 60%, and 20% of black carbon emissions. They also destroy our roads at a much faster pace than cars and produce disproportionately more of everything bad. So the old argument goes that the bottom group driving these old polluting bangers cannot afford to buy an EV. I quite agree. Of course you can't. But here you have two champions fighting at your side. First, the Green Party wants to introduce a scrappage scheme for old bangers. Get them off the road and into the scrapyards. There can't be more than a few million left, and so offer them money to scrap them. 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, it won't cost anywhere near as much as we give the oil giants in tax breaks. And here's your second champion riding to the rescue. An average old petrol or diesel car doing 8,000 miles a year spends about £120 a month on petrol, then spends money on road tax, then hundreds of years on MOT, repairs, servicing, keeping it on the road. And they drive around in a tank that can and often does break down. For about the same sum of money as you currently spend monthly, you can lease a brand new car, HEV, PHEV or EV on a 4-year deal. The new petrol and hybrid models will slash your petrol bill at least in half, and being brand new, you'll spend zero breakdowns, repairs, MOT, servicing the lot. But an EV will slash it down to almost zero. If you can charge at home, most can, choose an EV and that £120 per month will drop down to a tenner. Yeah, and no repairs, no breakdowns, etc. And you're driving around in a brand new EV. It can be done. Get these old bangers off the road and put the drivers into new cars. Now we see doctors on strike because they claim, adjusted for inflation, their wages are no better than 2016, or is it 2019, I forget. Are you aware the fuel duty has not been subject to any inflation since 2011? Almost all other taxes have, fuel duty hasn't. Yeah, it was introduced in 1909, persists to this day. The rate, however, has been frozen since 2011. Yeah, 14 years ago. If you want to get people into EVs and polluting and petrol and diesel vehicles off the road, simply add the inflation escalator to fuel duty. Oh, maybe backdate it. I suspect it's going to rise anyhow in this budget. It's a nice handy one to pick. Standby petrol and diesel guzzlers, that will raise a fortune. So if introducing this 3p tax now cuts the number of new EVs sold and destroys the government plans to get more people into EVs, what would delaying this 3p road tax mean? What would it achieve? Well, I look at it more in reverse. I look at it like child benefit. If you have a child from the age of X to Y, we will pay you a benefit to encourage you to raise children. But when your child reaches Y, we're going to stop the payments. Well, people accept that. Nobody moans when child benefit stops, shouting, "Nobody told me, I can't live without it." They knew. So a new road tax for EVs should be the same. We are seeing a reduced intake of fuel duty, so we will exempt you, not forever, but until 2020X, whenever. You will not need to pay anything to encourage you to go EV, but that will stop in 2020X. That's likely to increase EV sales as people get in quick to take advantage of the savings they have on offer today. See the difference? Also, by then, there will be many more millions of EV drivers, so they'll get a much larger total tax intake. Well, the more I look at it, the more stupid this would be when there are plenty of other methods to raise extra taxes. But we come to the sticking point. When a petrol station buys a litre of fuel, the fuel tax is already built into the price by the refinery. So when you pay, you effectively pay the fuel duty. It's simple. But how do you gather a tax on a few million private EVs? Well, some suggest putting a tax on the price of electricity at EV chargers. But I very rarely use them. I charge mostly at home, and the government cannot put that tax on all UK homeowners. It would penalise those that cannot charge at home and bypass those that can. It's not workable. Sorry, I really shouldn't give them ideas, should I? But they could increase the tax on electricity that we all get at home. But that would mean paying tax on your washing machine and cooker. That's not workable. And if they did, what about those with solar panels and batteries? Many of them don't fill their cars from the mains at all. It would bypass them totally. Well, the suggestion I've read is they should ask EV drivers to estimate their annual mileage and pay based on that, correcting it at the end of the year if it was wrong. But what would they do if 5 million EV drivers all guessed, "I'm only going to do 500 miles this year"? Now, it's not a stupid idea. It has already happened. I was involved. Many viewers will know in the 2000s or noughties, I ran my cars on homemade biodiesel made from used vegetable oil from McDonald's and other restaurants. And I registered the business like a good boy, and they sent me a form at the end of each month asking me how many litres I'd used and told to pay fuel duty. I seem to remember it was about 45 pence a litre at the time. It was retrospective, and HMRC had no idea how many miles I actually drove using biodiesel rather than ordinary diesel, which I could use. So some unscrupulous biodiesel drivers, and there were thousands, took to reporting, well, this month I used just 1 litre. Here's a cheque for 45p. And it was foolproof, because if you ever got stopped by the police, which we sometimes did, then we told them, no, look, any biodiesel we got in the tank, we will pay tax on it at the end of the month. And then at the end of that month, we declared, hey, this month I've used 5 litres. Here's a cheque for £2.25. Well, this system ran for a few months before we all got a letter from HMRC stating, and I paraphrase here, look, it costs us £5 to send out the forms, process your submission and cash in your cheque for 45p. We're losing money. Please stop sending in returns and stop sending in cheques. If you're using biodiesel just for home use, less than 2,500 litres, it's about 30,000 miles a year. Don't send in a return and you don't have to pay anything. That rule still exists to this day. I'll put a copy of that up. The biodiesel makers beat HMRC. So it's a valid question as to how would HMRC check how many miles we actually did. Some say MOT records, and indeed the MOT does record your mileage. But if you buy a new car and sell it before the end of the 3rd year, which many do, particularly with leases, you'll never have an MOT. How can they check? If they demand a photo of your dashboard showing mileage and ask for it to be uploaded to them, first, how many people of a certain age do not have a smartphone and do not have the knowledge to be able to do that? Others say, or get everyone to send in their actual odometer reading each year on a form. But they would then need a totally new department to check the photo or form against the stated mileage. 5 million cars is 20 or 30,000 photos or forms a day. When we get up to 10 or 20 million cars, is that workable? Have they worked that one out? That's some department and some cost. And once again, if challenged, they could always say, well, they weren't planning to use their cars that much that year. They might have an operation schedule, but they ended up driving far more unexpectedly. And how about ambulances cars, fire cars, and more importantly, Workability cars, which form the largest fleet in the UK? Are they even going to tax them at all? There is no cheap and easy way to monitor this using existing technology. Maybe in the future EVs will be fitted with an app that sends your mileage to them directly. But what about the millions of older cars? This is what I call a great idea on paper, at first glance, but totally mind-blowingly numbskull if you try to put it into practice. Now, most EV drivers are relatively law-abiding, and we're not out to cheat the system. We do not expect to get anything for free, but we will happily take anything that's offered. We use the roads, so we expect to contribute. But this is not the right time or place to introduce a new tax, especially as they hand oil giants 2.5 billion a year in tax breaks, especially as the fuel duty inflation escalator has not been updated for 15 years. In the grand scheme of things, £240 a year is not going to break the bank. That's the average UK of 8,000 miles at 3p. Let's face it, we used to pay far more. As a petrol or diesel driver doing 8,000 miles a year, did you realise you paid nearly £600 a year in fuel duty? Oh, hang on, because the fuel duty is also liable for VAT, we actually paid well over £600, and we never once complained about fuel duty. Never once got a campaign up or protested in any way. Oh, by the way, I always thought it was illegal to apply VAT to a tax or duty. Strangely overlooked that one. They just bundle the fuel up with the duty and other things and you can think of, and then they add VAT. It's almost invisible that way. Well, I am of the opinion that might just be scare tactics that governments often use. Just before a budget, leak all sorts of rubbish ideas, wild figures, so that when you announce the budget, we all go, oh, breathe a sigh of relief. Oh, it's not so bad. When it either isn't included at all or is much less than we thought. Or another tactic is to float the idea wildly through the media to see how much backlash you're likely to get versus the tax it'll bring in and the likelihood of getting elected next election. Too much backlash, and they just quietly drop it, saying, oh, it's the media making up stories. Well, here there's already an immediate and vehement backlash from right across the board, especially from the car manufacturers. They see this as absolutely illegal and immoral, an underhand tactic. Kill off the growth in new EV sales, then rake in billions in fines for missing the mandate target. That, as they say, is never going to float. I personally am quietly confident it will not be included in this year's autumn budget. I may prove to be wrong. But I'm going to close with the words of the SMMT, the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders. This is the body that the government uses for all data concerning motoring or cars. Now you know the background, this will make sense. They sum it up really nicely, and I quote, "We recognise the need for a new approach to motoring taxes, but at such a pivotal moment in the UK's EV transition, this would be entirely the wrong measure at the wrong time. Introducing such a complex, costly regime that targets the very vehicles manufacturers are challenged to sell would be a strategic mistake, deterring consumers and further undermining industry's ability to meet ZEV mandate targets, with significant ramifications for perceptions of the UK as a place to invest. A smarter, fair and future-ready taxation system requires a fundamental rethink, one that must be done in full partnership with the industry and other stakeholders." End quote. Well, sadly, the first reactions will soon be seen in the new sales figures for November, even if it's excluded from the budget. Just mentioning like that now was enough for that. Far better for the government to have been open and honest. Oh, no, please stop laughing. Had I had any influence, I would have announced that the revenue from fuel duty is reducing each year, and at some point we might need a total revamp. We all know that, we accept that. That would have created no panic. You could finish by saying, but not for this budget. That would put us EV drivers on notice, and that would encourage new EV buyers to get out quick to make some savings while they can. That would give a growth in EV sales, not a crash. Let's see who wins through. I'm Dave.